Hi, welcome to the Berry Nation podcast, where we support the bariatric community with humor, humility, and honesty. I'm April.
And I'm Jason.
I'm Natalie.
And today, if you're watching on YouTube, you know that we have one of our most favorite humans in the world who we actually got to meet at Renew 2022, Sam, bariatric chef Boyardee. Hi, Fred.
Hi, everybody. How are you?
We are so excited to talk to you. It was like life goals when we got to hug you and actually spend time with you at retreat or at Renew.
Truly.
And the presentation that you gave there floored us. The three of us were sitting at a table and we kept looking at each other like, oh my God, did you know that? We were just like so thrilled and angry at the same time because we were like, how did we not know this information? Why are we just getting it now? But silver lining, thank God Sam is a friend and we can talk about this on our podcast with him.
Well, thank you. I really appreciate that. When making that presentation, I had a vision for what I felt like people in the bariatric space, especially for patients, feel like they need. And so that was my goal, but you never know how it's going to land with people. So I'm glad that was your experience with it.
Oh, it landed hard.
I would look around and just looking at everyone, and everyone was like scratching their heads, jotting things down. I mean, these are conversations. What you presented at Renew was these are conversations that we've never had as bariatric patients. So I know April, Jason, myself, we're just so excited to have you on and dive even deeper into this conversation. So,
yeah,
well, and I remember I was kind of sitting next to Jason and Sarah, and I leaned over, and at one point I was like, Jason, did you just to see, you had graphics of food, and it was, you had a steak. And of course, like Jason is, meat master of the year. And I remember looking over at him and I'm like, oh my God, you showed this graphic of steak. And it was like, well, here's the macros, right? But then here's the micronutrients. And it was it was like, oh my God, I didn't realize that like a serving of some type of, animal protein could have all of these other things that were in it. I mean, it in the back of your brain. But to see it presented in that way, it just really drove home the point that our nutrition is so much deeper than just the big macros. But yet, if we don't even understand what the big macros are, we're not understanding, the whole nutritional picture, if you will.
Yeah, 100%. And I think it's a way, that could be a whole nother discussion, but it's a way to change the way that you kind of meal plan and think about, ultimately my work with patients and clients, I think about how can we focus on variety and focusing on different ways to hit different kind of, markers of your diet. And sometimes, calories are the most common thing that people think about, but there's so much more we all know calories are not created equal. Not that they're good or bad, but it's ultimately like, what are your goals? And that can change over time, focusing on, I want to get more of X, Y, Z. And that was kind of my intention behind the presentation.
Well, it was spectacular, and we are so excited to talk to you today. So before we kind of dive into the conversation, I would love to just give you the floor to kind of introduce yourself to our listeners and watchers that maybe don't know you. This is the first time meeting you.
Yeah, so my name's Sam. I'm a registered dietitian. I've been a dietitian for almost 3 years. It'll be 3 years in March of this year. I kind of got into the area of wanting to study nutrition with kind of a passion for kind of culinary, but also I had a huge science background. I wasn't sure did I want to go into become a doctor or a pharmacist? And so I kind of felt that those two things meshed really well. And then working in kind of how I got into bariatrics, it was very, very strange. I know a lot of other dietitians kind of will say the same thing. You kind of just fall into it. And you either 100% love it or you don't love it. And so I feel like I'm the lucky one who fell into it and really loved it. I worked in home health for about 3 months before I didn't really like it. And I was like, okay, I'm just going to leave without knowing about a job. And I ended up finding this job, applied for it, and I ended up staying with that clinic for about 2 years. And then I've kind of hopped around it. Now my professional job, I work in cardiology, so a little bit different in my day job, but I am on Instagram providing a lot of free content to this community. Honestly, for other dietitians, I get messages all the time like, you've really helped me become a better dietitian in terms of, learning more about the insights of bariatrics. So that's kind of what I do day to day. I am a single pet dad, dog dad. Yeah, that's me in a nutshell.
I love that you are I am also a pet mom. So, and Nat is a pet mom. Oh yeah. That like warms our heart. Cause that is, that's like peak life right there. When you get to say that you are it is. Awesome. All right, my friends. Well, so today's conversation, we kind of got some big questions that we want to tackle. We want to know, what are macros? What do they do? And what is their purpose? Why do we need to focus on them, especially in our bariatric lives, right? We know that food is not bad, food is not contraband, but are there some good versus some better sources or ways to kind of hit our macro goals? And then we really want to kind of dive into our bariatric goals. We get these questions all the time from members of our community. Do our macro goals need to change over time? And then what should our macro levels be? Right? Because there's different stages of our bariatric journey. Some surgeons give the numbers, others don't. We know that people in our community want to pull their hair out because it can just be like this like dystopian landscape when you kind of get into it. And then tracking. We want to talk a little bit about tracking. So we're going to cover a lot. I think we just dive in.
Great.
Let's do it.
Do it.
Okay, my friends. First question, what are macros?
All right, so macronutrients they're actually what kind of calories make them up. So when you look at a nutrition facts label, you look at the calories per whatever the serving is, and those calories are made up of those different macronutrients because each macronutrient has a certain amount of calories per unit or gram. So the three kind of macronutrients that we focus on, essentially, they give us energy, are going to be carbohydrates, protein, and fat. And alcohol also is kind of calorie containing, even though we kind of call it a non-essential nutrient, as we don't need that really for human function. There's really no benefit. So carbohydrates, you'd find those in foods such as fruits, starches, grains, dairy products. Carbohydrates include things like your sugars, more complex carbohydrates. And then when we think about our fats, we're thinking about those are the most calorically dense, meaning they have about 9 calories for every gram. So that's why for a smaller portion, you could have equal amount of total calories to a larger portion of like vegetables or fruit. You're going to find those in a variety of different sources. You'll find that in oils, butters, dairy products, nuts and seeds. Avocado is actually a fruit. And then we're thinking about protein. Protein is like carbohydrates, has about 4 grams of fat four calories per gram. And you're going to find that in animal sources such as like meat-based proteins. You'll find it in seafood. And then, like I've talked about at the Renew event, a lot about plant-based proteins. And I talked at the symposium that Kristen, Bariatric Meal Prep put on. I talked about how you can get that protein from things like beans, lentils, plant-based protein sources like soy. And when we're looking at kind of that composition, we'll talk more about those numbers, but I'm a big proponent of having kind of a balance of all those different nutrients because of how we digest them, how they affect, our satiety and our blood sugar, all that. We kind of want things to be in concert. And obviously kind of getting to that point, usually for many patients, isn't until they get further out from bariatric surgery when they have a relative capacity to eat enough where they can have all those different components. So it's definitely an ever evolving kind of plate, if you will.
That's kind of what the one thing that I took away from Renew that shocked me was like the complete plate method. When you put that up on the screen with a graphic of what it should look like, I was blown away because I'm still, even almost 2 years out, I'm still just big chunk of protein and I'm good and keep it moving. And, I kind of look into that as, Sarah's been on me about that lately, just about I need to, evolve my plate a little better. But then whenever you put the graphic up there, she's kind of nudging me like, see, and it just, but, it sounds funny, but I legitimately was just like, oh, okay. Like I never even thought about it because I'm like, well, if I eat anything else, then I'm going to be too full for the rest of the meat and the things that like I'm doing good because I'm getting my protein in. Like I just was so like laser focused on the protein side of things. I didn't even like the rest of it didn't even factor into me. Like it wasn't just that I was replacing my bad side of what would normally be like double mashed potatoes and like all the stuff I shouldn't be eating. I was just like, oh no, I can just eat protein now and just go on forever. Like it's cool. I don't need any side at all. Like I just won't eat bad. Not that I just won't eat bad sides. I just won't eat any sides. But that showing me on the graphic itself really kind of unlocked that in my mind. I don't know
And
why.
that's a really interesting concept, because I think ultimately why a lot of people have hesitation to adding other foods, especially let's say carbohydrates, especially carbohydrates of maybe that aren't going to be, let's say, vegetables or fruit, they get a little bit of anxiety because ultimately the healthcare professionals who in their clinic have reinforced so heavily on protein that that's really all patients really seem to know about. And I think the other thing is, you know, when people have bariatric surgery, that doesn't necessarily mean that just because you've had a successful weight loss that you have a extensive knowledge about nutrition. And obviously that's why I'm here and exist. And so I think what happens is, yeah, you can lose all this weight, but it's like, I'm not really still sure how to navigate all of this. But at the same time, I don't blame people for feeling like hesitant to like, well, I'm just going to fill up my plate with a lot of protein and just focus on that, because that's really all I've gotten education on. And I've been told in the media that like carbohydrates are bad, or I shouldn't be having them, or they're the food that I felt like I overate before, you know?
Yeah. I think it's also interesting too, because I don't think people know that macros are proteins, carbohydrates, and fats. I had a lot of people think that the bariatric macros are like protein, water, and vitamins, which is understandable because those are the three things that we talk about the most. And so I think it's also been really interesting for me also to be like, oh yeah, I should put things like mushrooms and, you know, maybe some sweet potatoes or something else on my plate, because those have those other nutrients that I need. But I think our community doesn't really think about it that way.
And I think, you know, later we're going to talk about the whole concept of tracking, but I do think in some essence, using the plate model that a lot of the dietitians promote in a way is a very subtle and kind of like gentle way of tracking, if you will. You know, a lot of dietitians will say, you know, if you set up your plate in this way, the rest of it will kind of work itself out. Ultimately, the bariatric plate method, like usually the larger goal, if you're using that kind of half your plate protein, roughly about 30% of your plate, your non-starchy vegetables, and then about 20% would be more of those carbohydrate containing foods. That is in turn going to put an emphasis on protein, fiber, and then getting in those healthy carbs. But ultimately, how you set up your plate could be in alignment with your goals. Like, let's say you're more active as you get further out from weight loss surgery, your relative goals for carbohydrates might look greater because that's the preferred energy source. So your plate method might have to be adapted where you're putting a little bit more emphasis on those kind of complex carbohydrates, and maybe you're pulling down your protein a little bit and pulling down maybe you know, how much fiber you can take in before like a pre-exercise meal. So in all reality, how you set up your plate could literally look different throughout the entire day, depending on like your activity level and what you're doing and where you are post-op. So I think that's probably where it gets overwhelming, is it's not this like copy paste the rest of your life. It's ever evolving.
And I think a lot of us go into bariatric surgery thinking, oh, okay, food will be copy paste for me. And it absolutely is not. And I think the other layer that scares people a little bit is that plate method is perfect. I can look at a plate and I can kind of guess those percentages, but really the percentages equate to a weight, right? So it's also like, okay, well, but I do need to measure my food a little bit because I don't know what 30% equates to in grams for this specific type of carbohydrate. So when you start going down that, you just kind of like, you just get overwhelmed, and you've been overwhelmed with food your entire life. And you get on the other side of bariatric surgery and you get to the point where I can like eat, solid food again. And just those same old feelings of overwhelmed and not having the education comes back. They just kind of flood your life. And pretty soon you're just to that point where you're just like, oh God, screw it, whatever. Like, I'm never going to figure this out. I can't. And that limiting mindset, that kind of limiting belief about our own intelligence can really hinder a lot of us. That's why we see the regain rate at 50%. It's because this is just so overwhelming. But the point of this conversation is to kind of bring the temperature down and to say, okay, it's okay to be overwhelmed. Let's chunk our understanding of what macros are, these little bite-sized pieces at a time, so that we can digest the information and we can start using it. And the question that popped into my head when Jason was talking about his protein first, method, why is that bad? Why is it bad to just be focusing on protein, right? Because the other question that we want to know is, what are the roles of these different macros? Why do we need them? Why do we need the different macros every day?
Mm-hmm. So why protein is put at an emphasis in the very, very beginning is when your body is in a very, very low calorie state, like bariatric surgery. Now, everyone's capacity is going to look different. And that's kind of why it's really hard for surgical offices to really give you like calorie goals, because in my opinion, I found in the beginning, there's really no way that anyone is like out eating their restriction relative to what their maintenance calories are. And I find that what can happen is if you gave someone a calorie goal, they felt like it was unattainable. I never would want someone to go beyond their physical cues and aim and try to eat to a goal that was beyond what they physically felt comfortable with. And at the same time, I also don't want to say that there's a certain calorie goal and you ate over that, that you overate, because we do know that we can give someone a caloric goal every day, but in all reality, that number can change day to day by slight amounts. So I don't necessarily think it's accurate, nor do I even really think that from like a lifestyle perspective, if I put myself in the shoes of a bariatric patient, I don't necessarily know that calorie counting for majority of people really helps them. And I don't really even think that, it's really necessary. I mean, I don't know your guys' personal stories, but I don't necessarily think that, I guess maybe I can open the floor to you guys. Did you guys kind of calorie track at any point in those first, like, let's say 6 months to a year?
I didn't. I focused on protein and water. That was my instructions from my surgeon.
And I would have to say all of you have been very successful up until this point. And I think at some point you have to consider like the quality of life. And so I think I take more of like a gentle approach to macros and tracking, where it's like, here is the kind of how you break it down, but let's realize that it doesn't have to be this kind of like bro science of like macros all the time and tracking, because we do know that a lot of patients pre-bariatric surgery have some kind of predisposition to disordered eating, and or they had a clinical eating disorder before bariatric surgery. So, obviously I would take that into account working with a personal patient or client, what method will work best for them. And obviously, as a disclaimer, this is not direct medical or nutrition advice, but I think that's always important to, work with someone if you're going to be, and that it's informed to what type of care you need.
Yeah.
Well, I know, like for myself, like I wasn't, it's not that any of the tracking or any of that is triggering for myself personally. The issue with me is I just never did it before ever. So I've got 44 years of never caring about it. So thinking I'm going to be this master tracker wizard and be on top of all my macros post-op, even 2 years post-op is laughable, because I followed the little paper I got in my bariatric Bible after I, had my surgery to a point, but I legitimately was just like, I'm just going to eat protein. I'm like Nat said, I'm going to protein, water, vitamins, like I'm going to do my thing, make sure I'm good. And then as I got, further down the line and could eat more, I started realizing, like, now at the point I'm like, I should probably start tracking what's going on, because not necessarily that like there's a lot of regain going on, but I lost, a lot of weight to the point. And then at this point now where I'm supposed to be at maintenance, I'm kind of fluctuating, and there's some things like there's some bloating and I don't really like, there's just some trouble areas that I'm not as happy with as I know I could be if I was to really break it down, like start really looking at the science of it, breaking it down, tracking it. But that's so, like I say, I don't have the triggering background of having tracking be that for me. So that, like you said, it's not going to work for everybody the same way. But the way I'm looking at it now, I never really worried about it until probably the last month or so. I've been thinking that it may be something I should look into.
Yeah. And I think with tracking, there's a time and a place for it, and it might look different for everybody. And also tracking might look different for you at every point in your bariatric journey. And sometimes I'm like a big proponent of just like temporary tracking. Like if you're feeling like you're experiencing, like, for example, if I have a patient come back at like 6 months when I was in the bariatric clinic and they were experiencing some stalling, I would first say it's most likely probably just a normal stall, but let's look more into the details and actually prove to ourselves that we're kind of doing all the baseline things as best as we can. And we can kind of rule out the fact that maybe it's not anything that we're doing to maybe be contributing to that, such as, maybe consuming more calories than maybe I think. Again, in 6 months post-op, it's very unlikely that someone is out consuming the amount of calories they need, to be honest with you. Many patients, they're still sub 1,000 calories, and everyone's metabolic rate would be well above that amount. But going back to the initial question that you asked, April, about kind of, again, when you're in that very low calorie state, protein is the emphasis, because your body naturally, when you're in a pretty low calorie state, as it's trying to lose weight, before it kind of starts tapping into that fat reserve, it actually, especially in a stress state, because you're also healing from surgery, your muscle is very, very easily tapped into as a source for energy. And we also think about, protein is huge, because ultimately we need to get that protein from the diet. We really can't make that protein from other sources. So it's really vital. That's why we have to make sure that we're really emphasizing a lot of those complete quality proteins as well, because some of those, what we call building blocks of protein, they can become conditionally essential, meaning we can't make them from our body. We have to get them from the diet. So those are kind of the reasons with healing, and with the very low calorie intake, the body could start losing muscle tissue. And unfortunately, that just is going to happen even if we meet our protein goals, because we're still in a pretty low calorie amount, but we can kind of ameliorate as much of that protein loss as we can.
Okay, wait a minute. I think I just had a breakthrough moment here in my understanding of what this is. So you're telling me that the reason that we have to be so protein heavy in the beginning of our surgery is because if we don't hit those goals, our body, it still needs the energy. And if it doesn't have it from what we're taking in, and we are not giving it enough protein, it will use our muscle as energy. It will literally eat our muscle for the energy to live our lives.
Yes.
Because we have to think about protein is more than just muscle. It is, hormones, it is different neurotransmitters, it's different functional parts of our body, other chemicals, enzymes, all these things. So it's thinking, okay, if I can't get protein from the diet, my muscle is a pretty big reservoir of amino acids. Let's just tap into that. And I'm not saying, and here's the thing, one thing I learned through taking, classes in metabolism, all of these things are happening in concert. It's not as if you're either in fat burning mode or you're not, or you're taking muscle and you're not burning fat. These are all happening. It's just the relative gravity of some of these are more prevalent than others. It's the whole concept of insulin's action does not mean that the anti-hormone like glucagon is not present at all in your body. It's just one of those bodily processes is more prevalent in that particular moment, but it's all happening in concert.
So why does our bodies then, so if our goal is to lose fat, right? So so I've had bariatric surgery, I'm trying to hit those protein goals, I'm missing it, but my body's like, oh, I need another source. Why is my body going to go for my muscle first before it goes for my fat reserves?
Because so when we think about the composition of an amino acid, it has nitrogen in it, and you're not going to find nitrogen in things such as fat or carbohydrates. So it's legitimate, basic structure is so different than fat and carbohydrates that it's interchangeable metabolism to create those proteins is not as easy.
Okay. So if you have hit your protein goals and you're burning that energy, then your body, instead of when it needs a little extra, it's not necessarily going to go for the muscle. It's going to go for the next thing, which would be like a fat or a carb, right?
Yeah. And when we're thinking about the function of each of these different things, typically your body's preferred fuel source is carbohydrates. So when we think about usually the brain, the liver, your kidneys really like to use carbohydrates. And not to say that we can't use protein, but it's really not efficient in terms of how we break it down. Its metabolism. It's a lot more work for our body as opposed to carbohydrates, the process of the Krebs cycle and all that stuff. It's just a more efficient fuel source. So when you look at the acceptable macronutrient distribution ranges for what they recommend for just general human life, typically 45 to 65% of your total calories, again, this is maybe not bariatric specific, would be recommended to come from carbohydrates. 10 to 35% would be from protein, and then a range of 20 to 35% from fat. So when we think about typically what happens when your carbohydrate goes really low, the fat stores are metabolized into ketone bodies. And those are kind of a secondary fuel source that your brain can use for energy. But its first preferred source is glucose, which is carbs.
And that's why it's important that we do consume carbohydrates, because parts of our body are craving that energy source. So really what you're telling me are these macronutrients are kind of like different levels of gas, right? Like there's 92, 87, right? Like there's, right, all this stuff. And different parts of our bodies are going to require these different fuels to be functioning at optimum levels. Yep. So if I'm not hitting my macro goals, different parts of my body are really going to suffer, which is why it's not a good idea to cut out all carbohydrates, because your brain needs them.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's why long term, usually a lot of patients will say that when they start adding those kind of carbs back in, just qualitatively, they say, I just feel better. I feel like I have energy. You know, I don't feel like I'm in such like a general malaise. I think part of that could also just be from the relative energy availability. As you get further out, your portion sizes kind of slowly increase, which is normal. With more calories is potentially going to come adding in things like those carbohydrates, and that's going to give you that energy. So, you know, a lot of people, for example, when they're on their pre-op liquid diet and they are on a pretty negligible to no carbohydrate diet to shrink the liver, because essentially carbs are stored in the liver and they want to shrink it down. A lot of people feel so bad, kind of like they're going through that kind of keto flu, and they feel like such brain fog and tiredness because the body's like, oh crap. It's not that you're detoxing from sugar. It's more so like it just doesn't have its normal source of energy. And it's kind of like, oh crap, and now I have to adapt to using ketone bodies, which is not its most favorite, but it can do that.
I think I relate to that a lot. I remember when I was able to start incorporating more like vegetables and fruits into my diet, I did feel like this sense of like elevation in my mood and my just overall well-being. You know, pre-op, I ate in a large quantity, but I still loved broccoli. I still loved my fruits and veggies. And so when you go, I don't know, 8 weeks kind of to almost 10 weeks without getting those nutrients in, and not having as many of those carbs, I just remember feeling like I was just depleted for so long. Yep. And then once I incorporated those in, I was like, oh, I can go for a longer walk and I can go and do all these things. Like I just remember instantly, like my mood was elevated.
Well, and it's interesting. They look at the effects of different macronutrients on different hormones. So cortisol is a stress hormone. And we actually know that carbohydrates can help to counter and downregulate the production of cortisol. So when a lot of people are experiencing spikes of cortisol, they find that cortisol can be an inhibitor to fat loss. We also know when you're stressed, a lot of times people are just going to hold on to a lot of fluid. Other hormones in your kidneys are kind of altered. So that's why a lot of times when dietitians like, oh, my client added, carbs back into their diet, and all of a sudden they kind of see a dramatic like decrease in like inflammation, or they feel like their weight dropped a significant amount. A lot of times that could be related to potentially that kind of stress interaction with feeling like your cortisol levels are going to go down a little bit by adding those carbs. And why a lot of people see dramatic weight shifting with, let's say, the pre-op liquid diet or going on a very kind of short-term low-carb diet is glycogen. It's the storage form of carbohydrate. You store it in your muscles and you store it in your liver. Other places too, but those are the primary sources. And it's going to hold water. So wherever that kind of glycogen is going to go, that kind of water is going to follow. So that's why a lot of times on the pre-op liquid diet, people are like, well, I dropped so much weight. It's probably by virtue of a lot of water retention. And that's why when a lot of people are, let's say, carbohydrate loading for like a big race, they sometimes find that they are maybe going to experience a little bit of just general bloating or just like water retention, because wherever that stored carbohydrate is going to go, the water is going to follow. So kind of like a bodybuilder, for example, when they start adding more carbs in, their muscles might literally look more full because they are fuller with fluid and glycogen versus someone who's been kind of dieting for a while. They're on very, very low carbohydrate. They're going to kind of look a little bit like flat and stringy because there's no glycogen. There's no storage from a carb. And as much as we say work out and use protein for your muscle, the actual aerobic activity your muscle really likes carbohydrates. So as much as we're saying, load up on your protein for your workout, we also find that when people get further out and they're actually engaging in more regular activity, that carbohydrates are actually also a huge component of that kind of performance plate.
So that's the difference where you see people when they like, for instance, a big thing that in the bariatric community that we know about is summer shredding. So when people are, when they tell you that they're leaning out for that, that's why, their skin wraps more tightly around that type of muscle versus somebody who's like actually bulking up and bigger as far as a power lifter type goes.
Yeah, a lot of times they'll do like a quote unquote like peak week protocol, from what I understand. Not that I'm a bodybuilder, but ultimately they'll kind of adapt their sodium and their fluid intake to really try to emphasize a more, I guess, like appearance of more of a full muscle. And so those things you can see visual changes. And so a lot of times when people, as they get further out from bariatric surgery, they're just feeling like so tired and depleted, or they just have a look of like just feeling like their muscles are weak. A lot of times it's not just like, oh, eat more protein. It could be a matter of just increasing calories and adding carbohydrates. I think there's this like central dogma of like carbohydrates are inherently fattening. Not really. It's really the caloric balance, and ultimately any macronutrient distribution greater than what you need over a period of time from a mathematical perspective would support weight gain, but it's not one particular nutrient. Why generally people follow a more carbohydrate moderate or lower fat approach is, I think carbohydrates are inherently palatable. So maybe they're going to take up a higher percentage. I know you guys did a podcast with I think it was with Laura about that, the whole addictive side of food. It's not a food addiction. It's just that some foods are more hyper palatable, especially in our westernized diet. And then when it comes to why a lot of times he approaches, because everyone's approach is going to look different, but generally a lower fat diet works well for people with weight loss over time if they're in caloric restriction, because of the fact that fat calories are so dense, meaning for a small amount, for example, like nuts, it's a low carb snack. A lot of people like to have them on keto or a lower carb diet, but for an ounce, which is like a quarter cup, it can have like 180 to 200 calories for only a small amount. So you have to kind of keep that in mind. If we're not really looking at portion sizes of fats, we might not even realize that we are maybe consuming a lot of calories in a very small volume. And also a lot of times fat, especially oils, they don't give us a sense of like, oh, I'm actually eating something. And I'm not saying you shouldn't be using fat, but versus say I'm having a lean protein and high fiber veggies, you're actually going to feel the physical restriction. But we do know fat's important. Fat also actually does help slow down gastric emptying. So there is some benefit to adding fat to your diet, but we want to be mindful of the types of fat and obviously like what is the relative proportion and is it in excessive amount.
Wow. I think
April looks really
I think you're kind of blowing our minds, Sam, because I come from, and we all come from this societal world of carbs are bad, don't eat carbs. I mean, I grew up from a very young age of like, eat vegetables over like a serving of popcorn. Like, don't eat carbs. These carbs are bad. They'll make you gain 100 pounds. That's what I was raised on. And so to hear you kind of say that, no, actually our muscles like carbs, that really blows my mind, because I thought muscles like protein, fat likes fat, and carbs are bad. Like that was in my brain. And so now I'm having to kind of reframe my entire life of thinking about how carbs interplay into my body.
Well, and we didn't know anything about complex carbs wasn't a thing. Like you hear it, but you're just like, yeah, but at the end it still says carbs. So that's like saying good murder. It's not the same thing. Like you can say, yeah, murder is cool, but like this is good. But like this murder is okay because it's a different kind of murder. Don't worry about it. But yeah, when you hear like you still attach everything carb is bad. So when somebody says complex carbs, you're like, well, this shit's hard enough. I don't need it to be any more complex than it already is. So I don't even know what that means. So you just kind of kick it out to the side.
Yeah, and here's the thing, carbohydrate, I guess, complexity, if you will, put it this way, like the types of carbs you want to use will vary depending on like what you're trying to achieve. And I think that's an important thing to look at is like, like we always talk about, like what are your goals, and then kind of work backwards. It's the same thing. So for example, like I go back to exercise, but I think that's something that a lot of patients are trying to get more into as they get further out from surgery. So pre-exercise, you want to think about things that are going to digest a little bit more quickly. So you might want to choose a carbohydrate. Now, pending this is someone maybe who is a little bit further out and they're less likely to dump, you might want to use like a simpler carbohydrate, things that have less fiber, because they're going to digest a little bit quicker and kind of get to those muscles for activity. And kind of, so like if you're getting really close to exercise and really like soon after exercise, you really don't want to be choosing a really high fiber carbohydrate, because it's just going to slow down how quickly it kind of gets to your muscles and you can repair. But let's say you're having a meal many hours after your workout, or you're having a meal many, many hours before. Let's say you eat breakfast and you're going to be training in the afternoon. That's fine, because those are going to be nice, slow digestion by the time you're ready to work out, etc. So like, it's just going to shift ultimately. Like for example, post-workout, Natalie, you had mentioned, like, I didn't know that muscles use carbohydrates. We actually know that those carbohydrates spike our insulin, that hormone that kind of allows the glucose to get into our cells. We also know that insulin actually, it's a hormone of growth. It helps to promote like cell growth, things like that, muscle growth. And when we think about like why we would want to add carbs to our protein after our workout, that actually can help increase muscle protein synthesis. So it's not just like slam down your protein shake. Maybe we can make a more balanced protein shake by adding like a serving of fruit or some yogurt for some healthy carbs, so we can actually enhance our muscle building capacity.
Well, and the other thing that just absolutely blew my mind, and this is just the connection that my brain made, right? But when you were talking about carbs and the connection to cortisol, right?
Mm-hmm.
If you're saying that carbohydrates can actually lower cortisol, it's interesting to me that when I get stressed, the first thing that I crave is a carb, and not a good carb, right? It's like, oh my God, I just want to eat Cheetos or pizza or whatever it is. But when I heard you say that, it was like, oh my God, my body is telling me it needs something. And I just took it to the next level, right? Like instead of going for that like complex carb, which is really going to provide all these other, macro and micronutrients, I'm going for something, right? I'm
More
listening.
palatable.
Exactly. Right. Like I am actually listening to my body when I'm stressed like that, man, my body's telling me, oh man, like, you need to lower your stress level. And my body knows that to lower that, if carbohydrates, the right carbohydrates, can help bring my stress level down, my body is telling me what I need to know. I just didn't have this knowledge and understanding about what it's actually asking me for. I just thought it was me being an idiot and being like, oh, well, you just want Cheetos or pizza because, you're a savage. No. My body is telling me it's needing a way to bring that cortisol down. And the right carbohydrates could actually help with that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's really mind-blowing. Like that actually really is our whole life. Our bodies were doing the right thing, but we chose, like Sam said, that more palatable, easier to eat option, when really it's like, okay, grab an apple or grab, some veggies or something, and that would do the same
sweet
thing.
Potato.
Sweet potato. Yeah.
And I think the other thing with that is, look, we talk a lot about how no one food is necessarily bad and we can't have them. Right. And obviously I think you have to create some sort of distance that's individualized for the person at your stages post-op. But I do find that, like, looking at the relative benefit, like asking yourself the question, like, why would it make more sense maybe, or why would I potentially feel better by choosing a complex carb? I think a lot of the times it's because of that kind of blood sugar balance. Usually, a lot of dietitians talk about how, again, pairing your kind of complex carb with protein is going to slow down that digestion. So you're not on this kind of like blood sugar roller coaster, as opposed to choosing more of a simple carbohydrate that has less fiber, less protein. You're just going to kind of see that spike in that blood sugar, and then you're going to see it come right down, and you can kind of feel that blood sugar crash, as opposed to having a more balanced meal. And we know that your blood sugar kind of trending is directly kind of related to how long you're going to stay full. If you're having that blood sugar go up and down really quick, you're probably not staying full and satisfied for as long. So those two things are kind of correlated, if you will.
Well, I mean, and I just put this in and how I know I operate as a human. I can go 0 to 60 in like 2.2 seconds. I'm like a McLaren F1, right? I mean, it's just like, oh my God. And when that hits, I'm just like, oh, I just want to punch walls. And like, to be fair, let's be real, right? Me going into my kitchen to make myself a sweet potato and this well-balanced meal is not going to give me that quick release, whereas a candy bar or Cheetos or some like, or pizza or something that I already know is like, it's quick, it's going to give me that quick stress relief. But really, all it's doing is delaying the inevitable. I'm not doing anything for my cortisol. I'm not doing anything for the actual physical stress that my body is experiencing. I'm just giving it that quick, that quick release. But that again is what this like work of weight loss surgery is. It's understanding what's actually going on in my body, learning about how I am responding to these stressors or these stressful situations, and then doing a little bit of forward thinking or planning just to know that what I do consume can really impact what I do in a much more positive way, because my body's telling me something is not right. And it's actually calling for what it needs. I'm not putting the right gas in the tank, right? I'm filling the tank, but I'm using 87 when I could be using 92. And my results are going to be very different in the long run for that.
And I think you make a really great point, and I think it can pivot the conversation to talking a little bit about tracking. I think commonly we talk about tracking in terms of like tracking calories and macros. Sometimes I just like with tracking, it could just be like, how are you doing with eating consistent meals? Like, for example, let's do context clues. Like, for example, if you felt like you had a day where you kind of just had this impulsivity to snack, or you overate, or you just felt like you kind of got to your meal when you were supposed to eat and you were just like ravenous. Obviously, some days you're going to be more hungry than others, but thinking like, let's look backwards. Oh yeah, I haven't eaten all day. Or the only thing I had this morning was like half of a protein shake that was maybe, 60 calories. Like, no wonder it's, 2 in the afternoon. I haven't been very cognizant about keeping up with getting enough calories and protein that I would feel really ravenous. So it's kind of like using tracking in a more contextual sense as opposed to like the numbers, and then thinking, okay, let's try tomorrow to make sure that I'm eating a little bit more of a protein and fiber rich breakfast, and maybe I'm incorporating like a small snack. So then, and see how does that make me feel physically when I get to 2 p.m. as opposed to how I felt at 2 p.m. today. And literally write down like, what were the physical feelings you were having, what emotional feelings were you having, and do you see any difference when you modify how you structure your day leading up into that event? And I think that's a very, in my opinion, I found working with patients and clients is a more kind of healthy way of looking at tracking. And then we can remove that tracking for a while. And then if we feel like we're kind of falling back into habits that are not supportive of our goals, we can reintroduce that.
I think for me, that's really helpful for me to hear, because I get really stuck on the, for lack of better terms, the more traditional way of tracking. And that being, tracking how many calories I'm eating, how many grams of protein, carbs, fats. That is for me very triggering. I've struggled with eating disorders in the past. And part of the reason why I never wanted to track, or I would try to track and then I would derail and then I would just kind of give up. And that is something that, what you brought up, Sam, is something that my surgeons team and I are working on is, some days, like you said earlier, you're going to be super hungry, and that's okay. And you need to eat food to make sure that you are satisfied and full. But other days I'm just not as hungry. I mean, I went out to eat last night and I was like, I want to eat more, but I am so full right now. Like, I am way more full than I would be a week ago. And tracking those ways, like, oh, am I getting all that I physically need? Yes, then that's good. Then you've tracked, you've gotten what you've needed for the day. Sometimes for me, hitting those numbers specifically, like if I don't hit those numbers or if I exceed those numbers, that's when I get hard on myself. And that's when I choose not to track anymore. And then that's when I get off track.
And I think the traditional diet, and thank you for sharing that, that's really, insightful to look at, is like, I think the previous dieting mentality for a lot of patients is how can I go as long as possible on like the lowest amount of calories? Like it's almost like, oh, I'm going to have my little 100 calorie breakfast so I can save those calories when I need them later. And then what ends up happening is we're not even realizing that we're just kind of going all day among our daily activities. Our brain is probably stimulated all the time. And as we've just learned, that carbohydrates are the brain's preferred energy source. And then we're wondering at like 4 p.m. why we're feeling like we're having a binging moment with some of these hyper palatable, quick and easy carbohydrate rich foods. And then we kind of feel bad about it when in all reality, maybe we could have developed a little bit more of a balanced eating plan for that day. And maybe we do incorporate a single serving of the Cheetos or, the cookies or whatever it might be. And you're able, here's my thing. I find that if you're staying more adequately well fueled throughout the day, it allows you a little bit more clarity when you get to the moment of like, I think I actually might want to have a small dish of ice cream, because you're making that decision when you're feeling maybe a little bit more well, quote unquote, nourished, as opposed to when you're making that choice on E, like you're just kind of like incoherent. You're just like, whatever, I don't really care. I'm just going to eat several servings of ice cream. And even then, there's no judgment around that. But if you're trying to maybe make more quote unquote conscious choices, maybe a little bit better portion control, it's a lot easier to do that if you're staying well fed throughout the day.
Well, and I think people also need to realize too that because we hear the term calorie deficit so much, and you're not going to lose anything if you're not in a caloric deficit. You got to be in this, and you have to people need to also understand that there's a safe way to do that, and there's also a not safe way to do that. And making it to 4 o'clock in the afternoon and only knocking down 200 or 300 calories is not necessarily the safest way to do that. Even though you're technically in a caloric deficit, you're not doing your body any favors because you're putting yourself in starvation mode, which is way different than caloric deficit.
Yeah, and how I like to look at it too is how can we create a caloric deficit that like you don't notice? For example, like let's say by maybe increasing the portion of maybe vegetables a little bit at your meal, then decrease maybe the portion of maybe a little bit of carbohydrate or take a little bit of fat down. Your meal kind of stays maybe the same level of like maybe size and how it makes you feel, but it could be more calorically, like less calorically dense. And we're not even actually realizing that we're putting ourselves in that kind of mild caloric deficit versus if you are, let's say, having a 100-calorie breakfast and you skip lunch, it's very evident to yourself that you haven't eaten a lot of calories. You know what I mean? So it's kind of getting out of that extreme of like to be in a caloric deficit that it has to be this like very apparent thing to your body. So how can we make those kind of small shifts? And that's ultimately why when we think about the bariatric plate method, that's why the next step of your plate typically is about 30% vegetables or fruit, because naturally for the portion you get, they're lower calorie foods. For like a cup of raw vegetables, it could be like 35 calories as opposed to a cup of, let's say, a carbohydrate that has fat on it that could be 200-300 calories depending.
Well, and I'm so happy to hear you acknowledge that a lot of the struggle in my bariatric journey is that I was always hungry before surgery, always. And I hate being hungry. And I went a couple months after bariatric surgery where I wasn't hungry at all. And now my hunger signals are back. And it's really hard to say no to things when you are truly hungry in the moment, right? Head hunger is very different than real hunger. But when you've got both of those things going on, you are just desperate to eat anything because you want to get out of that sense of discomfort. So to come up with an eating style or a plan or just how you're going to eat that allows you to have those hunger signals, but not so strong in a way that it moves you into a panic mode, right? That you can get into these deficit areas safely. And like what you said, right, without kind of really knowing it, because you're still satiated, you're still enjoying the foods that you want. It's balanced. It includes all of these big macro and micronutrients that we need, right? But you're just kind of, you're doing so in a way that doesn't spike that panic is powerful. And I think that's what many of us are seeking. And we want to understand that.
Yeah. Another tool of tracking that I think is kind of in alignment with what you're talking about is the hunger and fullness scale. And, I think I've done a post on this before, but I would say it's hard to really apply that in the beginning stages because we do understand that there is a lot of absence of hunger for a lot of people. And they kind of get to that sense of fullness very, very quickly. But let's say you're, a year out, 2 years out, and you're just feeling like you're having those kind of normal hunger. And again, the key operative word normal, we understand that like bariatric surgery was not to like eliminate your hunger hormones. And we know that ghrelin is produced in other parts of your body other than your stomach. But that being said, is leaning into the hunger and fullness scale, and whatever you want to call it. You could call it 10, feeling like you're so hungry, ravenous, you could eat your hand off, or you could call that 0. And then on the opposite end of the spectrum, 0 or 10 being you really have like an absence of like desire for anything, like you don't want to eat at all. The ideal situation is where you're kind of starting to eat in the middle, where like you're kind of neutral. And that's another thing you can think about is when you kind of, maybe you're not tracking even what you're eating. You could write down what you ate. Maybe you leave the portions off if that's triggering. And you could actually look at like what time of day and like designate a number and seeing how often are you starting your meals way on either end of the spectrum, especially if you feel like you're kind of getting to your meals like, oh my gosh, like I am like always feeling like I'm ravenous, and put it in context. How active were you that day? What was the composition of your breakfast? And those are more like, I think, subtle and gentle ways to make modifications to how you set up your day. Because here's the other thing too, we talk about the bariatric plate method. Maybe you find for you in the morning a very, very heavy, slightly more up to carb breakfast works better for you. And so when you get to lunch, you don't feel like you are ravenous, or in general, you feel it gives you more energy at work. Like, let's look at these like non-calorie related reasons why we want to focus on like the balance of our plate. Like just by knowing like, wow, my breakfast makes me feel super satisfied, but also it gives me a lot of clarity and energy for my day. That's a great way to look at it versus like, oh, macros or calories are like a budget and we're running out of calories for the day. Like looking at it from an abundance mindset of like, what do these calories and different macronutrients do for my body? And how do I feel when I'm eating XYZ way?
Well, and and I've always been told, or whether or not it's right or not, this would be a good way to find out, is if you are going to eat carb heavy, you want to do it earlier in the morning so you have the rest of the day to burn through it, and your body can burn through it throughout the day. Is that right?
Well, I wouldn't say necessarily. It would be more so like when you're thinking about overnight, for example, when your body is in a quote unquote fasted state, it's obviously not having an influx of carbohydrates. And so it's thinking, okay, where can I kind of get carbs to keep my blood sugar stable, to keep me alive? Because we don't want our blood sugars to drop. So, we pull it from our liver, we pull it from our muscle, et cetera. So when you wake up and you've been fasting for many people since their last meal, maybe like 8 to 10 hours, depending, when you think about what your body really needs, is it actually really needs carbs. So again, I understand that a lot of people love the morning coffee, but thinking about maybe I probably want to add like a serving of carbs to this just to kind of give myself a boost for my brain. Because at the end of the day, most people's jobs, especially nowadays, being virtual, like you're just doing a lot of stimulation with your brain. So thinking about, yeah, protein's important because it's going to keep me full. But then, so I think of it this way, protein's like the brake to your kind of hunger and fullness. And then the carbs are kind of like the energy and the gasoline. You kind of need both. And I would also say, fat also can, in some cases, kind of act like a brake. And so it's kind of that balancing act of like, we need the gasoline to kind of accelerate the car, but we also want to keep the protein, the fat, the fiber in there as a way to kind of keep the car from going way too fast, way too quickly.
It's so interesting that you should say that, because, and again, I'm so inspired, or I'm just so happy to hear you acknowledge that we're going to need to track in different ways at different stages. And we need to try on different methods to find the one that works best for us. That's what we're always talking about in our bariatric journey, right? We really have to be the scientists of our own life. We have to experiment. And what I have recently found is that if I very much love overnight oats. I love them. They seem to have a nice balance, right, of those macros. But I am so hungry after I eat overnight oats first thing in the morning. I just am. I could eat it, and then an hour later, I'm like, oh my God, I'm hungry. If I start with eggs or very protein heavy as my first meal, I'm fuller for longer. And then if I roll into the carbs, that gives me the boost for my afternoon. But I wouldn't have known that if I wasn't just experimenting and being curious and noticing what my body was doing. And the power of that is that we can have this information and know that, oh, my body's different than others, as it probably is and should be, right? Like we've all got the same parts, but mine are using it in some different ways. But that can also indicate that, oh, well, maybe I got something else going on. Like if I'm noticing those things. But if I wasn't noticing, if I wasn't tracking, I just wouldn't be aware of it.
And the reason why I love using that with patients and clients is because it's so individualized, and like you feel how you feel, and there's no sense of comparison. Like you're not comparing like, oh, this person had this many calories for breakfast and they could barely finish it, and I ate the whole thing and still felt like maybe I could eat a little bit more, versus like you're just experiencing your feelings and then making changes based on how you physically feel. And there's no like feeling of like, oh, I'm doing something wrong. And I think that's another reason why a lot of people don't like to track, because maybe they know someone who is trying to eat a similar calorie goal, or they were at the same time post-op and they're a similar size to them. So they feel like, why am I eating differently than Sally Joe or Bob? Like, I think that's what feeds into it.
Yeah. And it's so interesting, April, because I'm the opposite of you. I cannot do eggs and meat in the morning at all. Like, and that was opposite from pre-op. I mean, it was eggs every single morning. And now I have eggs for lunch because I can't physically handle eggs early in the morning. And that was something that I was trying to force myself to do post-op. Was like, no, eggs are good for you. You have to eat them in the morning. I don't know why I thought that, but that was the rule that I imposed on myself. And now I eat oatmeal or overnight oats in the morning. I'll add some protein powder in, so I'm still getting some protein in there. But, you know, I have more of a carb-based breakfast, and I'm finding that gives me that energy in the morning. And then by lunchtime, I'm like, okay, I'm ready for eggs or lunch meat or chicken. So it is interesting to have two bariatric patients on the same journey, quote unquote, but I am very different from April, and that's okay. It's okay to experiment and figure those things out.
Yeah, because we've both been successful.
Yeah.
Right. So again, like we cannot compare our journeys. We can learn from one another. We can educate ourselves. We can take in this learning and this like profound understanding of what macronutrients are, and use it as a true tool for the first time probably ever in our lives. Right.
Well,
and like redefining
it finally debunks the plate police that are out there like, well, I can't believe you can eat all that. And you, oh my God, I could never possibly take down 2 whole eggs. Oh, how dare you?
That was my thing. I could never eat 2 eggs. And I'm like, well, good for you. I'm living my yolk life right now, loving my eggs.
Yolk life. Oh.
Well, and it's like, I think then probably, and we all know this, especially you guys, that's coming from a sense of insecurity. They're just projecting that. But again, I think it reinforces this idea of like, you know, again, like the contest is not to eat the smallest amount of food for the longest period of time. And that's who's to say that person is actually happy with the fact that they are eating one hard-boiled egg. Maybe you don't even know who this person is and where they are post-op. Maybe they don't know where you are post-op. And who knows if they're eating a whole egg and they're just kind of quote unquote lying to people to tell them that they actually feel satisfied, when in all reality, maybe they're like, oh, I could be eating another portion, but I can't. I mean, thus why a lot of people get thrown into those disordered eating habits, because maybe they were told their portions have to stay under a certain volume. I mean, that's why on my page, I think I try to share more about like, this is how you could attain this maybe number of amount of protein, but you'll see that every picture, there's a different volume and shape of how things look. And inherently when people say, oh, you shouldn't be eating more than 8 to whatever amount of ounces, if you're measuring that on volume, that's going to look different based on the foods that you're choosing. It's also going to look different depending on the foods you choose if you go off of weight. So that's why I think long-term, the plate method and looking for balance is probably the most simple way to track that a lot of people can use, because it isn't skewed by all these different metrics.
Yeah.
I think you do that very well, Sam, on Instagram, and I think that's why so many people always share your posts. Is you really do show such a range of what our lives, what our plates can look like every single day. And you do a really good job too of showing the more whole foods versus you're probably going to have some oikos yogurt and a protein shake that day. You know, I think it's helpful for us as bariatric patients to know that life is fluid. We say this all the time on the podcast. You're not going to be eating whole foods every single day. That's just not feasible in the world that we live in. But I think it is helpful for us to see what that looks like day to day. And I think you do a really good job of that.
Yeah. And I think that kind of goes into what you guys are going to be talking about at the retreat, is kind of getting out of that all or nothing mindset of like, if I'm not eating whole foods all the time, then I just shouldn't do it because I can't be perfect, versus thinking like, I'm probably eating a whole lot more fruits and vegetables and whole grains than I probably ever had in my whole entire life. So I'm going to like be kind to myself and recognize that eating a serving of fruits and vegetables is better. And if it's only just one a day, is better than having none. And maybe I'm doing that on a more consistent basis than I ever was. Maybe it was I had a fruit or vegetable one day a week, and then for 6 days straight, I didn't have any. You know what I mean? So really giving yourself that grace of like, okay, and that is like a real life application of kind of getting yourself out of that all or nothing mindset.
Yeah. And I was huge on fruit and stuff before I had surgery, but post-op, I was one of those people that as soon as I figured out the carbs and the sugar, the natural sugar stuff in fruit, I was like, no, never, like stay away from it. I can't possibly, because oh my God, I'm gonna like I'm the dumbass that's sitting over here going, yeah, I'm gonna gain all my weight back because I ate fruit. Yeah, don't eat that orange. You're gonna gain 190 pounds back. Like it was completely irrational of me at the beginning, because I'm like, I will never touch a banana. Like, no way. You know how many carbs are in a banana? Like, so it's good to hear, knowing that those things can come back around now that my lunacy is over, that I've kind of come back into a normal mind state. There was lots of stuff I was afraid of post-op. I wasn't touching anything. I was just going to eat my little quarter-size serving of meat and just live my life.
Well, and the tricky thing about this is that a banana is more than natural sugars and carbs. A banana is those tiny, micronutrients. It's the vitamins and the minerals and the potassium and all these other things that go into that. And again, that can be the overwhelming part, because a banana is not just a banana. It is 105 different things that go into whole nutrition for us. But it's having a better understanding of what those things are doing and why your body needs them and what your body's going to do with that, right? It's going to utilize those carbs. It's going to utilize that natural sugar. It's going to utilize that potassium for a lot of different other things, and they can fit in our diet.
And really, I think what I'm getting from what you're saying, April, and I really just resonated with me, is like, so often maybe we're making our nutrition choices based off of the goal of weight loss or maybe weight maintenance. But what if maybe we're making our nutrition goals on more than just the concept of like weight? Like, what if it's based off of how we feel, how we perform? How do we enjoy this? Are we trying to maybe just incorporate more variety, or we're trying to get more fiber? Because I think it's a meme, or just people like say it all the time on Instagram. It's like, your whole life is not meant to be working and trying to lose weight. Like, your life is more than weight loss and working and making money.
Our life, our value.
Yeah, I struggle so much with iron. I always have. My iron levels, my whole life used to be like nearly zero. Same with my vitamin D. And I used to think red meat was horrible for you. I thought I shouldn't eat red meat. I can't eat red meat. And it's like, okay, no, but I need iron. So I'm going to eat red meat or other vegetables that have iron in them. And when I do stick to that, when you know it, I feel better because I'm getting that micronutrient, that thing that I need. And I think that's something that as I'm going into my second year of bariatric surgery, I'm realizing that food is fuel, yes, but it's also a way for us to also medicate ourselves in the sense that they are our vitamins. They are, important for other reasons than just energy, which I think we do get really hung up on, which, yes, we need energy. We need to be getting our energy from good foods. But it's also the fact that, like, when I eat some broccoli and maybe some spinach, like, that's also me taking my vitamins in a sense. Like, I'm medicating myself and keeping myself well, and making myself feel better. And I think that's something that we don't necessarily think, we've never thought about before, and maybe still struggle to realize. But as I'm farther away from my surgery date, I'm realizing, oh, food is fuel, and it's also a way for me to feel better.
Food was the cause and food is the cure. Right. It truly was, right? Food was the cause of our obesity in a lot of different ways, right? Probably the largest, but food can also be the cure for our chronic disease of obesity. And it's interesting that that one single thing can do both of them, but that is the human existence.
Well, and the linking point would be the individual. And I think a lot of it comes down to the individual's change in the way they think about it, their mindset.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, and also you can, you think about it like what Natalie was saying, with your complete diet, the amount of vitamins you're taking in, you don't have to, like, your supplement shouldn't have to do all the heavy lifting. So just because you take your vitamins every day, don't count on your vitamins to solely do all of the, to metabolically change you, when your diet can do the majority of the heavy lifting. And that's a supplemental vitamin you're taking that's just supposed to help boost those things that you're already taking in with your diet.
Well, we talked to Kristen Willard about this. It might have been like almost a year ago at this point, because we get questions all the time about supplements, right? And the biggest takeaway from that conversation with her, and it still lives on our IGTV if you guys are interested in watching it, is that a supplement is supposed to, it's called a supplement because it's an addition to what you're already doing. But if you're not already getting in those nutrients in the foods that you're eating, that supplement is not going to cover it. It's not going to, you can't swap them. You've got to do the food and the supplement to hit those goals. And especially as bariatric patients, because we physically cannot consume the amount now that our bodies require, which is why we have to do the food and the supplement. That's why we can never stop taking our vitamins. We have to eat the nutritious food, and we have to supplement so that we're getting 100%.
It's like, I wish I could just take just better fiber every day and not have to eat a vegetable, but it doesn't work that way.
Aren't we all, though? I mean, oh, Kristen.
That, I tell you, oh my God, Sam, well, you've thoroughly broken my mind. I think everybody is feeling the same way here. What's there one thing about macros that you wish every bariatric patient to know?
Yeah, so if we go back to that initial kind of statement I was making, when we think about calories, those are comprised of the macronutrients. So it's your fat, your protein, and your carbohydrates. Ultimately, when those numbers, if you're curious about the numbers, they're equated. They're based off of so many factors. They're based off of your age, your gender, your activity level. In an acute setting, if you have an injury, you have an illness, your lifestyle, your body composition. There's so many things that factor into how many calories you need, but also the distribution of what your macros should look like. And so as much as we really talk about, everyone's going to be different, that's why, because we all ultimately are different people. We have different lifestyles. We have different genders. We have different ages. We have different diseases or lack of diseases. And so I think when we say that, people don't really resonate. Like, is that a bunch of like hoopla? Why can't we all eat the same? Like, we truly are very different. And again, we're still learning so much about nutrition and all of this over time. Probably there'll still be a lot that there, even after we don't exist on this planet, that we're still going to be learning about. But I think it's really important to recognize that just because you have bariatric surgery, and you're told that you are supposed to aim for 68 grams of protein a day, that's not like destitute. Like as time goes along, your macronutrient intake and your calorie intake and all that, it's going to change. It's usually for most patients, it should increase, but it's also going to look different day to day and season. And I'm sure, you know, each of you are kind of at like a different stage post-op. I know April, you, and then Jason and Natalie in terms of who's the furthest out. And I'm sure all of you can attest to the fact that you're always learning and you're always just kind of modifying and seeing like what works best. And like, there's nothing wrong with that. And we're not supposed to just be like being successful after weight loss surgery with quote unquote macros and nutrition is not just being like, who can be the most consistent with just hitting 60 to 80 grams of protein? Because again, you guys are immersing yourself in social situations. And like, we also have to realize that success can look like I can make quote unquote nutritious choices and still be able to be out in social settings. Like that is a huge quote unquote, in my opinion, NSV, because so often I know a lot of patients that struggle with like how to integrate being kind of on track and then feeling like the second they're out in social situations, they feel extraordinarily out of control. And so how can we kind of get in that kind of nice straddling position of like, yeah, we know how to stay on track throughout the week, but when we go out, we have our tips and tricks. And I think, again, the plate model, I always go back to that, is a great way to kind of navigate where do certain foods go on our plate. And maybe, you know what, the carbohydrate food and that small portion when you're out at the social event is that super fun food that you normally don't have. But then you are putting an emphasis on protein and a vegetable. You know what I mean? Yeah. And maybe sometimes when you go out socially, that wasn't the emphasis at all. Like just because you had one event where it wasn't aligned to your bariatric goals does not mean that maybe the breakfast you had earlier that day wasn't something that puts you one step forward to making quote unquote more nutritious choices. Like it's, again, getting out of that all or nothing mindset.
There is so much to learn along this journey, but we are so thankful to have friends like you in our corner to help us with that education and to guide us in a way that is safe and accessible and meaningful for us. We're so aligned in our thinking about how you choose to work with patients and how you choose to help this community. And we're very thankful for all of your insights, because it's a lot. You got a lot going on up here.
No, sometimes I'm like, all right, calm down.
Same, honestly.
Like I overthink it. I'm like, okay. Well, I
it's all
appreciate
good.
you guys for having me on and allowing me the space to kind of share this. I think about, it's funny when it's like almost like a full circle moment, because I started on like social media, maybe like it was December 2020. So like maybe a little bit over a year ago, which is kind of crazy to think about. And I remember kind of like finding your page and remember, you know, you doing lives with like Kristen and stuff like that. And I just thought it was so awesome, like what you guys were doing, but then also seeing like how it was kind of a symbiotic relationship of these dietitians, like sharing and really realizing they kind of broke beyond the barriers of what they felt like they could traditionally do in their clinics. And that's kind of where I'm at, the precipice of feeling like there was a lot of kind of things that I felt like were silenced having to work in a more sterile clinic, and realizing that like there is such a amazing group of individuals who really need this information. And, you know, to know that I can provide a majority of that from a free perspective, and that's super impactful. I mean, I always say like every day, just do like one good deed that you can do for society. And that's kind of what I feel like I do when I'm on social media, or at least try to do.
Mission accomplished.
Yeah, we're here to tell you that you're doing it, and we just need you to keep doing it.
Yes.
Thank you.
Well, and we're really excited. We're going to see you, like, we're going to get to hug you here in a few short months, right? Because we're both going to the Spring Bariatric Society retreat.
We are. I'm very excited. So I'll be speaking kind of similar topic to what we spoke on today. The kind of official title, not that I know the exact name, but it's kind of beyond protein. So we talked about macros, but we will talk more specifically, or I will be, about kind of the specifics of carbohydrates and fat, because I think protein gets a huge like hit, which is important. But I think, you know, especially for patients who are a little bit further out from bariatric surgery, like how do we navigate the kind of world of like what types of fats should we be choosing and what types of carbohydrates and the different types of fiber. And so leaning a little bit into that and kind of, again, what's the function in the body? How does it relate to our intake after bariatric surgery? What are maybe some recommendations for goals that we should be hitting? And then I know you guys are going to be talking kind of about all or nothing mindset, from my knowledge.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Yep. Yeah.
Yep.
I think our topics are going to beautifully complement each other, right? Because you're really getting to the nitty gritty of why we do have to go beyond protein, which is like this is like a perfect little trailer for your talk at Bariatric Society. And yeah, and we will be talking about that all or nothing. How do we break out of that? Because it is not beneficial for us as we're learning to live this new bariatric life. I mean, the speaker lineup is going to be straight fire, you guys. If you have not purchased your ticket yet, we highly recommend you do so. I mean, there's a lot of amazing things that happen at these types of events, but the Bariatric Society and Advent Health, it's patient first, right? It's patients that are really putting this event on. They are curating the people who are providing information. And a lot of the speakers are bariatric patients themselves, like us, or they have been entrenched in the bariatric world. They are specialists in that area. So it's just a wonderful opportunity to really get information that is tailored to our needs. And on top of that, you get to actually hang out and hug and be around the people that you've probably followed on Instagram and social media for a very long time. And you guys, it's at the Dolphin Resort at Walt Disney World. So it's like a vacation, right? This is a legit vacation with your friends where you get to learn some stuff and then you get to go have some fun. I mean, it's like the best of both worlds, really.
Catch me at the pool all the time.
Well, and I will say, if you've never been to an event like this, I was talking to Danielle, who put on the Renew event in Ohio.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the biggest part of why that weekend, it was almost like I had a come down or hangover from it, was it was so great to share my expertise. But I think the bigger thing was just meeting all of you in person, obviously meeting a lot of people I had never met before, but also connecting with people that I didn't even know existed. And obviously, selfishly, it feels good to hear from people that what I'm sharing is making an impact, but also just hearing other people's stories and just being able to be a fly on the wall and sit there and watch everyone go through that emotional experience with their, that Maddie put on and stuff like that. And so, I mean, just coming from a professional who works with individuals who've had weight loss surgery to get to meet all of you guys, I can only imagine for being a part of a community that sometimes can be highly ostracized, to be able to be embraced by so many people that you don't even know or that you've even wanted to meet, I think can be so impactful.
Yeah, there's something about being in a room full of, 80 people here initially, being in a room with 80 plus people, and they kind of, freeze up a little bit. But this is different, being in a room full of 80 people that get you without explanation. You fit in, you're welcomed, you're supported, you're appreciated. You don't have to explain why your plate looks the way it looks. You don't have to explain why you're drinking enough water to fill a pool, or why you're going to the bathroom so many times because you drank so much water you could fill a pool. People just understand. It's just different when you're around people that get it.
Yeah, we were all maybe the not so cool kids growing up, and now we all get to be the cool kids together, and it's a really amazing feeling. So if you are planning, or maybe you're on the fence about coming, we hope you'll lean towards going, because we are here for you. We're here to help you feel safe. I know Sam, April, Jason, myself, we're all going to be there with open arms, and you can just come as you are, whether you're pre-op, thinking about surgery, anything. Not only is this going to be an incredible education event, but it's going to be those lasting connections where, if you do get your surgery date, there will be 100 people that are DMing you excited for you to get your surgery date, and all of those little wins thereafter. So I hope that if you're listening and you're on the fence, that we can help reel you in a little bit. Come on over. The water's
And there's a
fine.
nice variety of different topics as well. You know, I know today we talked a lot about mindset nutrition, but there's workouts. So if you go to the Bariatric Society's like Instagram page, I think it's just at Bariatric Society, they throughout the last 2-3 weeks, they've been releasing the speakers. I think they should all be released by now, if not close to all of them. And there is nice carousels of the speakers, who they are personally, professionally, and then what their topic is. So you can obviously get a little bit of a better idea to see if there is an individual or a couple people that you're excited to see. I mean, I don't think there's really anyone on the speaker panel that I wouldn't be excited to listen to and get to meet. And that being said, you know, we're offered kind of support codes. So unfortunately, these would not be like a discount to you, but if you are interested in supporting either myself or Berry Nation as a collective, you can use our codes to just kind of let Advent Health and Bariatric Society know who you're most excited to be seeing. So my code is BOYRD when you go to their checkout. And then are you guys just Berry Nation? What is your?
Yep. Ours is Berry Nation.
Easy.
Yep. And I'm so appreciative that they did that. I mean, the ticket price is insanely low for what you get at retreat. Oh my God. It's nuts. And when you use the code at checkout, you're letting the Bariatric Society and Advent Health know who you're really excited to interact with, right? Like we know that you're going to be there for a lot of different people, but if there's one group, one person that you're like, nope, this is who I absolutely am not going to miss, use their code. And it literally tells them like, oh no, this is why people are coming. It's just a way for you to continue to support the people who've been supporting you along your journey in a meaningful way. And, you know, it can help ensure that they're there for future events as well. So, you know, I mean, it's not a bad thing.
And if you are concerned about, you know, pricing, they do offer once you are bought your ticket, there is, I think, a Facebook group where you can connect with people in terms of lodging. So if you are, let's say, either you, and it's also kind of a shameless way to get yourself a way to meet some new people as well. If you're not too timid to share a room with someone you don't know, there is, I believe, a kind of roommate like situation. I don't know exactly what it looks like, but that can be a way to kind of reduce the cost. I think the hotel rooms are like $206. Is that about right per night? So it could be a way to help maybe, eliminate some of that overhead cost if you're concerned.
And people are, saying this is when my flight gets in. Does anyone want to share a lift? I mean, there is a lot of community on that Facebook page. So once you buy your ticket, request to be in that. I think there's instructions like in an email that you get, but I mean, there's people that are hooking up, all about everything. Do you want to split a room? Do you want to split a lift to the hotel? Like there are so many different ways for you to make this trip more cost effective for you. There are ways that we can get you there. If you need help talking it out, DM any one of us and we'll help you out.
Exactly. We will share with you all the tips and tricks. Yeah. Cause that Facebook group is filled with people are talking about outfits. They're talking about when they're going to the pool, like with the sessions that they want to go to. It's a great place to start to make some new friends so that when you do arrive at retreat, you're not feeling like, oh, I don't know anybody. You're going to know basically everybody that's going there. You're going to know it. And we know that it's scary at first because, what if they're not, how they appear in real life, or what if this, or what if that? Trust me, nobody cares what you're dressed like. Nobody really cares what you look like. They are there because they are excited to meet you. They want to know more about your story. They want to get to know you as a person, and they just want to hang out and have some fun. Right. So I just keep telling people, come on vacation with us. Yeah, it's a retreat. Yeah, you're going to learn some stuff, but just come vacation with us.
Oh, vacation. We hang out. Like we do it. I've been trying to tell everybody, I'm like, at the last retreat, like we were up and out the door at like 7:30 every morning, and we didn't get back to our rooms until like 2, 3, 4 o'clock in the morning. Like we hang out. Like we're out.
If we can throw down in the middle of a tundra in Ohio, who can imagine what we'll do if we're in Florida?
That's what I'm saying, my dude. That is what I'm saying.
Dude, that Renew Saturday night was lit. I mean, we had a house.
Make it through that.
Oh, and you were having a hard time even making it through. I'm sorry, Sam. I got to call you out. I was like, Sam, come on, bro. You need to. You're gonna have to start
our first pickleback shot with
yes.
Sam and April. Oh. I mean, it was a good time, and that's what it is. It's just a good time. My favorite memories from the San Diego retreat in November was literally looking around. I was sitting in the pool, talking with all my friends, and literally every single person in that pool was a bariatric patient or a surgeon or, you know, a dietitian. Like everyone was there because of the same thing. They were all there because of bariatric surgery, and everyone had their scars out. Everyone had loose skin. It was great. It was amazing. And that is literally when I think about retreat from November, that's what I think about, are those moments where I could just look around and see bariatric patients.
Yeah.
And I felt home. And that's what we want for you guys as well.
I love it. Oh my gosh.
I think you just summed it up perfectly.
Pretty much.
Amazing.
It is. Yeah. That's Jason and Natalie's superpower.
It's like a radio ad.
Seriously, if anyone needs radio ads for bariatric surgery / bariatric retreat, hit me up. I got you.
DM
me.
Sam, my friend, where can people follow you on Instagram?
So my handle is bariatric chef Boyardee. So there's 2 C's in it. So I'm just on Instagram right now. I've thought about traversing over to the world of TikTok, but I think my ego and my emotions feel not good about that. So I'm just going to stay on Instagram where it's very supportive. So yes, but just on Instagram. And then within the next couple of weeks here, I should be hoping to start onboarding some clients. So if you're interested in ever maybe working with me in an individual capacity or in some way, there is a link in the just like my bio, so you can go there. It's just like the Google form that you can fill out with basic information. So at any point, if I ever were to be offering one-on-one or group coaching services, that's kind of where you would be able to find me. But I do offer on a pretty regular basis free content, you know, a lot of things, like visuals, things of that nature on Instagram.
Yeah, your feed is straight fire. I absolutely, the 3 of us recommend that you follow, like Sam. And if you ever have any questions, you guys, he is a real human. You can just send him a direct message and he will either point you in the right direction or help support you as best he can. So do not be afraid to reach out. And I have a feeling, Sam, you might see all 3 of our names on your wait list. Just saying.
All right.
It could happen. Well, Sam, we got a little bit of housekeeping that we're gonna do, but don't go anywhere. Thank you so much for joining us today. We're so thankful, like I said, that you are in our corner, and we are excited to continue to invite you on the podcast to share all of your knowledge.
Yes, of course.
Miss Nat, is there something you'd like to tell our friends?
Of course. Well, we are actually recording this on our favorite day of the week, which is Sunday. Sundays are our favorite days because we get to highlight all of you guys, our wonderful Berry Nation community, our podcast listeners, our Instagram followers, all of you guys. This is the day where we get to showcase you, all that you've done, and also share a little bit more just about you as a person. We do shout out Sundays every Sunday. We have a Google form in our bio where you literally just fill out some questions about, you know, whether you're pre-op, post-op, you know, some of your highs, some of your lows, some learnings that you've gotten since your surgery. And then you upload a picture of yourself. It does not have to be a transformation photo. It is just a photo that you are proud of, that encapsulates you. And then I receive it and I just do a couple quick edits, and then I put it up on our feed every single Sunday. And it's a way for us as Berry Nation to get to know you guys, but it's also a way for our community to get to know you as well. So if you want to do that, you can just go to the link in our bio and fill out that form. You do not have to be a member of our paid membership. You just literally fill it out, and that's all you have to do. And first come, first serve. I just put them up as they come in. So we really love it. We love learning about you guys, and we love highlighting you as our community.
It's pretty rad. It is absolutely our favorite day. It's how we grow the community, and it's how we get to know the people who are within it as well, and share stories, because our stories matter. It's time. It's time to share our patient stories, my friends. And if you guys are looking for an extra level or layer of support, we definitely invite you to check out the Berry Nation membership community. In March alone, I think we're getting close to 80 events that our members can attend and access. And by events, I mean support groups that are led by therapists, other support opportunities that are led by registered dietitians like Sam that help us navigate the nutritional waters. We have wellness coaches, and then we have peer-to-peer support events. So like in March, we're going to do a bingo night that's like open to all of our family and friends. We have lunch hours, there's journaling breaks. We're onboarding new experts every single month. So if you are just looking for, like I said, that extra layer of support, I highly recommend you check out the community. Just go to berrynation.com and you can try it out for 14 days before you commit, because we know that this support might not be right for you, and that's okay. We're here to just get you the help that you need. Okay, Jason, I think we did it. Want to take us out?
Sounds good. Sam, thank you again for joining us. Your wisdom, your insights, your friendship, we just appreciate it. We can't thank you enough. We thank all of you who have been supporting us by liking, sharing, subscribing, leaving us voice messages on our Anchor app that we can incorporate into future podcast episodes. We appreciate you liking, sharing, and rating us on your favorite podcast player and YouTube as well, because all of those things just help us grow and get the word out to other patients that may need help, just like you guys did when you found us. So spreading the word helps them to help you, to help us, to help everybody. So people helping people at the end of the day, and that's what it's all about. And just remember, you've got this, we've got you, and we'll see you next time.
Awesome. Thanks, Sam. Thanks, guys.
Bye-bye.